What's up everybody? I'm back, baby. I know it's been a long time since I put out a critique video, but I wanted to let you all know that they're not going anywhere. We just had a lot of stuff to get through and record, but we're back on track. This week we're checking out Apprentice videos, and I'm super excited to get back into it. What's up guys? Big news, I've finally got some merch. I've got this design and many others on a bunch of cool items. We've got hoodies, we've got bomber jackets, we've got socks, you name it, I've got it. And what's even cooler is I got my friend Sabrina's help, who is actually a director over at Disney Animation. That's why they look so dope. I'm super lucky to have her help, and I hope you guys are just as excited as I am. So use the link below and go stock up on a bunch of cool shit. Thanks again, Sabrina, for all the help, and thank you guys for all the support. This first one comes from Michael, and Michael, you mentioned you've been apprenticing for about a month and a half now, and usually that makes me pretty nervous because we don't normally see great results in that short amount of time. So let's see what you sent over. And I was right on the money. I know this is a skull, but it is pretty scary. And not because it's a skull. This is kind of exactly what I would expect to see, or maybe less than what I would expect to see after about a month on skin. It just doesn't really look like you have any kind of formal training or you've been drawing for that long. I'm not gonna go that hard on you because you did mention this is your first tattoo, and to be honest, it looks better than my first tattoo. I wish I had a picture of that floating around somewhere, if it's even still there. It's probably just a scarred mess. Well, at least I can tell you're using an actual machine on this tattoo and not just some remote control car battery, like I did. But this thing does need a lot of work. Before I get too far into the weeds on critiquing this thing, I will say that a realistic skull probably isn't the best choice for your first tattoo. This is why I generally say to shoot for traditional, even if it's something that you're not gonna stick with in the long run. Because traditional tattoos can teach you how to build nice solid lines, good shading, and solid color saturation. Something this is lacking a lot of. Or better yet, practice on fake skin. It's a great option for modern apprentices to practice on instead of f***ing up somebody's real skin. You can tell that you don't really have control of these lines because they are all over the place, especially in the back part of this skull. I know there's a glare running through the nose and mouth, but it still just doesn't look great. It looks pretty chewed up. There's a few different techniques that I can tell you to try out, but it's just not going to resonate with you until you're a few dozen tattoos in. So my best piece of advice for you is to just be tackling palm-sized traditional tattoos. I promise it'll help you build a good foundation for the long run. But I appreciate you having the balls to send that over, and please stick with it. And I would love for you to send me an updated photo in 6 to 8 months. Up next, we've got a tattoo sent in from Connor Modrak. And Connor, you mentioned you've been tattooing for about 6 months now, and you sent over this traditional-esque space monkey. Now, I will say that this is definitely the type of tattoo you should be working on at this point in your career. Take note, Michael. But when you do a tattoo like this, it's a lot easier to see those areas that you need to work on, which is great, because in this instance, I can tell that you need to work on your lines. You've got a couple little wobbles here and there, and the circles that are on the chest aren't really that circular. But overall, this is a nice looking tattoo. I just think you need to slow down a little bit and really take your time, especially when it comes to those lines. The saturation's fine. The black shading could be tightened up a little bit, especially around the legs and in the groin area.
The camel is out in full effect. I love it.
You have these repeating shapes in the legs, so the shading that is there should almost look identical to one another. The shading in the hands is a little weird. I wish that black shade was coming from the thumb rather than running right through the finger. There's something off about the helmet that I just can't put my finger on. It does look like the left side of the helmet shifts over a bit too much. The line at the top is a little weak, and I do think it could use a bit of that black shading that you used on the right side, because it just feels a bit empty. You have these somewhat symmetrical shades all over this tattoo, so I'm just not sure why you left that side open. But overall, nice tattoo. I think you're right where you need to be, and thank you so much for sending that over. Real quick, I want to take a break and give a shout out to the sponsor of this channel, Mad Rabbit. Mad Rabbit is a tattoo aftercare company that I've been using for quite some time, and I think you ought to give it a try as well. They've got all types of products to help you out with your tattoo, whether that's during or after, they've got you covered. So head on over to madrabbit.com, fill up your cart, and make sure to use code PONY20 to save 20% off of your entire order. All right, let's get back to it. Up next, we've got one sent in from Remco. And Remco, you mentioned in your email that this is your very first tattoo on skin. You said that he insisted this tattoo be on his neck, but as artists, we have to know our limits and set our boundaries. In the end, you are the one in control, and you can say no. It's okay. I would first try to lay down a few more tattoos on other parts of the body that are a little more forgiving than trying to tackle a neck as your first tattoo. Because although this tattoo doesn't look near as bad as I expected, I know it's not gonna heal as good as it looks now. The lines in the stem and leaves are pretty weak, and that big bold line around the top of the rose is just gonna get really fat and spread out over time. Doing a successful tattoo on this part of the body, especially behind the ear, takes a lot of practice, because it is very thin skin and is prone to blowouts. And if you've never tattooed skin before, then you wouldn't really know that. So again, you have to take control of the situation because you are the one with the machine after all. And your name goes on this. Had this tattoo been on another part of the body, it probably would have looked a little bit better, and I think you'd be happier with it. All that being said, the red looks nice. I just worry about those lines in the rose. Because having experience tattooing that area for several years tells me that this is probably gonna end up being a black rose at some point in the future. But I would love for you to send me some updates on different parts of the body because it kinda looks like you got the hang of it. For the most part. Speaking of updates, Anthony Adkins sent over a couple tattoos, and the last time he sent one over was almost a year ago. He sent over this black and gray rooster, and I mentioned that he had some pretty solid lines, and this time he sent over a couple Mothman tattoos. It's nice to see you sticking with the same style, really pushing that solid traditional foundation. And I can definitely see some improvement with this tattoo, even in the line work itself. They just became a lot more crispy. If we zoom in, I can see some areas of black that aren't really that well saturated, and it looks like you got a little bit too happy when it came to that black shading underneath the wing. So as far as improvements go, I definitely think you stepped it up when it comes to your lines, but I still think there's some areas that you can work on when it comes to your solid saturation. Not to mention just having a little more control when it comes to those tighter areas. When it comes to the other Mothman tattoo, the first thing that really jumps out at me is the choice of red you used for the robe. It just doesn't have that traditional punch. Another thing is, I wish you pushed that black shading over just a little bit in the leg to meet up with those lines that are there. It would make the leg look more full and a little less awkward. The last thing on this tattoo is the feathers at the top. I wish there were more lines in those feathers, similar to how you had in the other tattoo. It just doesn't look as wispy or smooth as the other one. Also, the blue in the feather, just a weird choice, but that's my personal opinion. But Anthony, I'm happy to see the growth and thank you so much for keeping me updated. Up next, we've got one sent over by Ellie Baker, and Ellie, you mentioned you've been tattooing for just over a year. And you sent over this black and gray realistic skull with a cowboy hat. Now this is how it's done. And this is a great comparison of somebody who's been tattooing just for a month and somebody who's tattooing for over a year. You can definitely see a lot more control in this tattoo compared to Michael's. Sorry, Michael. There's just a lot of things to learn, especially within your first year, that you can implement into these tattoos. And a month, to me, is just too short of time to be trying tattoos like this. Anyway, enough comparisons. I do really like this tattoo, although I wish there was a little more skin tone throughout the entire thing, and that can be in the top of the hat, or even in the face of the skull itself. The more shading you have on the back and underside of the skull will allow you to play with lights more so in the front. But as far as keeping this thing nice and tight, I think you did a pretty solid job. The textures look pretty dope. You just have a few little wobbles when it comes to the lines, especially on the top of the hat, or even on the bottom of the jaw. Is this a crazy, mind-blowing tattoo? No, but for tattooing just over a year, I think you are right where you need to be. You also sent over this little potion bottle, vial. I don't know what it is, but it's got a skull on top, and that's rad. Hey. But overall, this tattoo's solid for the most part. There's just a couple little changes I would make. For one, the spider web does seem a little stiff. I probably would have changed the direction of the spider web to come from the skull to the potion bottle itself. Make it a little more organic feeling. Give something for the spider web to hold onto. Another thing I would like to see is a little more whites in the potion bottle just to give it that glass feel. It could have used some white on the left and right hand sides of the bottle just to make it look a lot more shiny. And I think you can use a little less white in the skull. The skull's not shiny, it's not reflective, it doesn't need it. But other than that, these are some solid tattoos, and you should do this for a living. Thank you so much for sending these over. All right, so that's gonna wrap it up for the critiques of this episode, but you know we gotta talk about my favorite tattoo. And with this episode in particular, I gotta give it to my last submission, which is Ellie with this black and gray skull cowboy. This is just a solid piece for somebody who's been tattooing for only a year, and being an apprentice, you can't really ask for much more. And for a tattoo this size, you really got a lot of nice details in there without overdoing it. So Ellie, thank you so much for sending that over, and congratulations once again on being my favorite this week. All right, now that's going to bring us to one of my favorite parts of the episode, and that's featuring an artist who I think you should all be following. And this week's artist is Matt Wright out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I really love how Matt's work keeps a traditional influence with just a little bit of flair. Some might call it neo-traditional. Either way, it has that solid foundation that any apprentice could look at and learn from. And I really love this rad rat. He's just so cute for a dead guy. His color choices are great. They all seem to work really well with each other. And again, that's something that apprentices should take note of. Learn about color theory, and his use of black is extraordinary. That's what really makes his colors pop. So do yourself a favor, head on over to his page, give him a follow, and let him know I sent you. And learn a thing or two. Well, that's it, guys. Thank you so much for sticking around. Don't forget to subscribe while you're here, and as always, I will see you guys next week.